Mr. Weir, 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. I'll continue with Dr. Lee, and I'm wondering if you could tell us what's the average income of a radiologist in Canada?
It varies from circumstance to circumstance, and we don't have statistics per se on what the income of a radiologist is. But what I can say is that depending on your jurisdiction, the nature of your work, it will vary. What tends to happen is that radiologists will operate in groups. And so what we do is, because each of us has particular subspecialty expertise, mine is in interventional radiology, which is why I ended up talking about that, we spread out so that because of the nature of billing, sometimes that varies. So we try and even those out.
Sure. So I guess my question would be, do you think that an incorporated radiologist making $250,000 per year deserves to pay less tax than an unincorporated radiologist earning the same income?
I think that the nature of the question begs, we need to actually extend that out from the perspective of what are the individual circumstances of each of those radiologists in their situation. It may be that the incorporated radiologist has taken on more risk, for example. They have taken out leases, mortgaged their house, mortgaged their resources in order to buy clinics and buy more equipment, whereas the other one has not.
Is it possible for a radiologist who doesn't have a clinic but works out of a hospital to incorporate their practice?
That's a very good question. I believe that in certain circumstances, and it depends on which province you're in, that is possible, but I am not a tax accountant nor a lawyer, so I would not pretend to have a definitive answer on that.
Okay, because I mean, it does seem to me that if you had two people doing essentially the same work and earning the same income, you'd expect them to pay the same amount of tax, whether or not they're incorporated. Does that sound reasonable?
I think it's difficult to compare one to the other because the nature of what we do is so different. Some radiologists will take on risk because they have private clinics, for example, or they'll take on additional equipment. Others may not. It's difficult for me to say that definitively yes, because to some extent you're comparing an apple and an orange, and it would be unfair of me to do that.
Sure. So you mentioned the fact that physicians don't have pensions or health benefits, and I think you were using that as an argument for these tax advantages that aren't available to the vast majority of Canadians for whom incorporation is not an option. Might a better solution be to pay physicians a salary that includes pensions and health benefits?
I think that it would be beyond my pay grade to suggest that I have the solution to the nature of physician pay. But I think what I can say is that as a physician and as a small business owner, that we as a community would be more than willing to interact with the government to talk about all of the different options on the table rather than just the few that we have in front of us.
To say, Aaron, as well, it'd be great if we could get back to the pre-budget aspect of this hearing. We've heard a lot on the tax measures, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm asking questions about the testimony that I heard and the responses to questions from a previous MP. I do realize, though, that time is of the essence, and I'm wondering if you could give me a bit of an update on where the clock sits.
You're okay for another 2 minutes because I took 30 seconds from
you.
you.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, of course, the history of Medicare in Canada is that the original vision was for physicians to be paid a salary, which would include pensions and other benefits like other public employees. It was the Canadian Medical Association that fought tooth and nail against that and in favor of fee-for-service compensation. I mean, do you see that as the best model, or do you actually think that it would be better if physicians had pensions and health benefits?
I think that the overall circumstance of healthcare in Canada is complex, and so it would be not appropriate for me to say yes or no to that question because I'm certainly not an expert in that nature of health policy. But what I can say is that I think that given given the totality of what we're dealing with, this would certainly be something that might enter into further discussions. But obviously that would involve the federal government, the provinces, physicians. Certainly I think that what we're talking about here is saying this one particular tax policy is something that we have major concerns about. This isn't necessarily something that you would make a vast, humongous change to the rest of healthcare. Again, we're talking about unforeseen circumstances, possible unforeseen deleterious effects on the healthcare system from a massive policy change. And I certainly would not feel comfortable saying, yes, let's go there. I can't do that.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, you suggested more government funding to help purchase diagnostic equipment, which strikes me as a very reasonable request. Certainly, we want the best possible equipment for Canadian healthcare. But it seems that a large part of your justification for physicians incorporating is that they need to buy this equipment themselves. So I'm just wondering how you reconcile those 2 points.
So, from the perspective of when we talk about the equipment purchases, the vast majority of clinics that radiologists own outside of a hospital system are X-ray and ultrasound machines. And certainly that is part of the process that they need to do. That's part of the incorporation process to do that. What we're actually talking about mainly is CT and MRI machines, the vast majority of which are in the public system. Certainly in my province, the vast majority of CTs are in public institutions. And we are specifically, in fact, a patient is specifically prohibited from having a private CT for a medically indicated service.
Mr. Graywell?
Thank you to the witnesses for testifying. Mr. Lee, you belong on this side of the table. You're very good at not answering the question directly, but Mr. Weir gave it a pretty good shot.